Welcome, everybody. Today we have two great speakers who have participated in Mayor Linda Gordon's Commission for Racial Justice and Equity. We're excited to hear from them. As some of you may know, the report came out yesterday, and we think the timing is great to have these two speakers tell us about their work on their respective subcommittees. The commission started in June 2020 of this year, and as I said, they just published their report yesterday, October 23rd. Our speakers participated in two of the five subcommittees. Brian Maynard, Assistant Police Chief, participated in the Law Enforcement Justice and Accountability Committee, and Abdul Muhammad, who's president of our local NAACP, participated on the Racial Equity Committee. Now, the purpose of the Mayor's Commission, and I'll read this, was to assemble diverse community members to listen, discuss, and create empowering solutions that dismantle systemic racism in Fayette County. And before everybody joined, I was talking to these two guys, and I wanted to express my gratitude as a citizen of Fayette County for all the work that they've put in to compile this report and all the meetings I'm sure they went through. So without more words, I'll let Abdul Muhammad, who's going to speak first, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask him questions about his presentation. And then I'll introduce Brian, and he will make his presentation and we'll ask questions after. But let me tell you a little bit about Abdul before we get started. So Abdul Muhammad has been a Lexington resident for 14 years and currently serves as Senior Vice President of Mortgage for WesBanco Bank, Inc. for Kentucky and Indiana. Mr. Muhammad received his Bachelor of Science degree in Finance from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's current president, as I said, of the Lexington-Fayette County NAACP, and also served on the Mayor's Racial Justice and Equity Commission on the Racial Equity Subcommittee. He's been married for over 28 years and has 2 adult children. So we're ready to hear from you, Abdul.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. And good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Abdul Muhammad and excited to be with you all this morning. What a phenomenal opportunity to have a conversation in such a way like this, a Muslim-Christian dialogue about what's going on within our community. As I think through, I've again been here for 14 years, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. So my background, my perspective was rooted in a totally different community. But having lived in the state of Kentucky now for over 24 years, obviously I've grown a lot, along with my wife of 28 years and my 2 adult age children that I am now learning from. So just to give you just some insight, I've always been passionate about helping others. Being the oldest of 6, maybe God gave that to me to have to step into a role like that. But again, how could I give back? About 4 years ago, I decided that I want to give back more with my finance background. I decided to join the NAACP because I wanted to find a way to get on a committee and actually just find a way to just teach and give back knowledge that I had around finance. Little did I know that there were transitioning that was going on within the NAACP unit here. Somehow I was asked and elected to be the president of the unit. And in doing so, I've grown a lot. I've learned a lot. I learned a lot throughout my youth in reading books, but now I've learned a lot just listening to people. So I find this kind of space is very rewarding. Having said that, I've had now an opportunity to serve on the mayor's council, specifically around racial equality, racial equity. And so we started meeting back in July of this year with all the unrest going on throughout the country, having to deal with COVID, just, again, just a lot of different things. This obviously bubbled to the top. And what an opportunity it was to try to focus in on and shine a light on specifically things that we could do to help move our community forward. So we started meeting on July 16th, and we progressed all the way through August 31st. And at that point, we turned in a report. That report was part of a full report that the mayor released yesterday. And you can find that out in the public domain, and I have forwarded it on to Sister Rashid. So a couple things that I want to kind of highlight around here. Some of the things that our committee was a little different in that some of the committees like education and economic, very specific, fine-tuned. Housing and gentrification, very specific, fine-tuned as well. Health disparities. So those were things that, you could really just wrap your arms around: law enforcement, justice, accountability. Ours was racial equity. All right. So what do you do with that? So the first thing we wanted to do was define what does racial equity look like, because the committee was made up of different people from different backgrounds, ages, cultures, etc. Here's what we came up with. So the subcommittee believes that racial equity exists when the distribution of resources and opportunities is neither determined nor predicted by race, racial bias, or racial ideology. That's just one of the subpoints. Two, the structures, systems, practices, and cultural narratives in society provide true situational fairness and equity opportunities. There's a democratic commitment to dismantle the false narrative of white supremacy and address legal, political, social, economic, and historical contributors to inequality. Families and individuals are able to thrive, flourish, and interact in all aspects of their identity, including race, religion, gender, orientation, ability, social, economic backgrounds. The most vulnerable communities in our society have access to mechanisms to achieve social mobility and voice in naming their reality, describing how these systems of oppression play out, developing solutions that draw upon their assets. And last but not least, all people, cultures, and identities are equally valued, recognized under the belief that strength comes from the diversity and expression of a shared humanity. So as a 53-year-old Black male, born and raised as a Muslim, named Abdul Muhammad, you add all that up and you can only imagine some of the things that I've personally seen as an educated, I wouldn't say well-educated, but educated Black male growing up in our country. And so as I think back to that, and then I reflect back to having grown up with parents that were there for me and helped raise me and set a foundation to which I was able to grow and prosper along with my other 5 brothers and sisters. I've seen quite a bit, but then I fast forward to reflect now on my 23-year-old son and my 25-year-old daughter, and the things that they're now going through, the things that I had to address and deal with, but now they're dealing with it at warp speed because of the change in our society. Um, so to me, I always try to find a way to go back and then reset myself to a foundation. And that's where, my religion helps me to refocus and keep me consistent. And I'm sure everyone's religion should, I would hope, be able to do the same thing. However, in looking at this, I am a firm believer that you have to stay focused on the end result. And for me personally, I always challenge my family as well as the members of the NAACP is to be broad-minded, to take in perspectives from others. I always say protect the doorway to your mind, right? So not to allow so many things that are out in the world kind of mold into your mind and just seep in, and then at some point in time you become hard and fast in just one attribute or one focus it within your life. So moving on to recommendations from that committee, my thing that I personally want to share on the committee was whatever we came up with, whatever we wanted to share with the mayor that would then become part of this plan, that there would be full accountability. And what I mean by full accountability, I mean that not only are we going to hand over a document that we hope and pray will become a working document, that we will also, and you'll see in this report that we've done, is the communication piece, because I'm a firm believer that this report moves no needle without all parties embracing and owning it. So the first thing we recommended was an implementation of racial equity impact assessments. So let's take a look at where we are. So we went back, there was a study done in 2010 by the Lexington Urban League, it's called Black Lexington. And we went back and took a look at that and saw what some of the disparities were at that time, what was not addressed, what was being asked to be addressed. And so we recognized the fact that that document was created, but it didn't remain a living document. So what we wanted to do this time was not only recreate some type of assessment, but we wanted to make sure that we put in our report that we would ask the mayor and the council to not only create the assessment, but make it ongoing, make it something that the council and the mayor, whomever they are, as years move on, would need to go back and take a look at and assess, hey, how have we progressed in life? If you want to grow, typically you will assess where you are when you start, and then have you made any efforts to grow, and how does that look like? So we want to do the same thing in this space. And because time is so precious this morning, I won't go digging into the details because the report is out there, but I'm just trying to give you all some quick bullet points, if you will, on some of the things that's within it. So addressing, for instance, ongoing racial inequities in both an economic and a moral imperative, right? So according to the National Equity Alliance, racial gaps in income cost the United States about 2.4 trillion. And that's coming out of a report done in 2014. In 2015, Harvard Business Review found that racial health inequities cost the economy an estimated $245 billion in excess healthcare expenditures. So how do we communicate? How do we change the conversation at our dinner tables? How do we change the conversation on a Saturday morning that goes across all lines, that we open our ears and not our mouths so much to kind of listen and take in and recognize some of the conversations happening at your neighbor's dinner table could be slightly different from some that's happening at yours, right? And then how do we share information that becomes best practices so that we can move this needle together? Recommendation number 2, create and implement a multimedia communication strategy designed to educate, inform, and engage the community in matters of racial equity. So um, some of the things necessary to do the following would be dedicate resources that will develop strategies and methods, identifying targeted audiences, work to create a safe space on ongoing community dialogue and engagement. And so isn't that ironic that this morning, today, we've working to have a conversation in a safe space. What a great example this is right here. As I was thinking about this morning, and I've been part of these conversations for the last couple years, and I'm glad now to kind of do a reset button and get more involved and engage back into these conversations. I thought about what a phenomenal model already in place to be able to share and dialogue back and forth about, you know, what we're trying to do and how we create a better tomorrow. So another bullet point there, distribute information on work of the commission and racial equity. So we don't want that to become just a document, a feel-good document that's done and we handed it over to the mayor and the council, and now it gets tucked away on a nice little bookshelf and somebody comes by and dusts it off occasionally. That it needs to be a working document. No different from a document that I would use at work, that I would create a plan. There are companies and corporations around the world today, right now, creating their business plans for 2021. And you can believe me, having been in corporate America for the last 20 years, I can assure you that those documents are pulled on a weekly, monthly basis. Where are we at? Are we on the right course? Do we need the level set? Do we need the course correct? That is happening over and over and over. And so if we don't shine a light and have a plan of action on where we're trying to go in this space, we will veer off the road and head to Never Land. I often say when people come to me and they say, well, I want to get somewhere. And I'm like, okay, so, you know, which one? You know, I want to get to McDonald's. Okay, so it's 1,000 of them out there. Which one? Well, I tell you what, just go out to the corner, make a left, go to the right at the next street, make a left, and go up the block. Oh, well, that's not the one I was trying to get at, right? So my thing is have a plan of action, know what it is that you want to achieve, stay focused on that, communicate around it, and then continue to go back and level set and say, am I headed in the right direction? Moving on, let's see here, looking at time. Ooh, man, time has getting away from me real quick. I am going to go to recommendation number 3, establish a job training and community center, right? So personally, being intentional around this is very important. I'll give you a quick example. At my job, so I manage the residential lending department for WesBanco Bank. They're across 6 states, footprints. We've grown tremendously, $15 billion bank today. Because of that growth, we've grown into other communities. So now we have a heavy Hispanic community that we're engaging. I cannot speak Spanish. So I thought in my mind, how can I do a better job as a leader to go out and be able to communicate broadly our financial ability to help this consumer? So getting outside the box is going to be important, but more importantly, being intentional about wanting to grow that space. I was intentional because I knew that there were not a lot of lenders out there that happened to be Hispanic in the Lexington market. So what did I do? There was a young lady who ran a business that would come into our offices every evening. And one evening on the way out the door, I saw her and I turned back around, and it's late at night, and I looked at her and I said, you know what, can I ask you a question? Do you know of anyone that happens to be, first, bilingual, second would be possibly a Hispanic Latina, that I can engage that would be looking for a job in the finance world? I'll even train them, right? And so she said, well, let me see what I can do. A week later, my phone rings and the gentleman calls me, and I say, so how did you get my number? Where are you from? He said, oh, I was talking to this young lady. She told me to give you a call. Well, lo and behold, that young man was her husband. He happened to be working uh, at a Sprint store, but guess what? He had a CPA background. He had a CPA degree, but he's Hispanic Latina and had not been given an opportunity to participate in a financial space. I hired him on, I put him through a special training program, and now a year later, he's doing phenomenally well, growing, helping others. So again, how do we be intentional about how we create spaces? And job training and community centers are so important to give hope and faith that to others that need that. Fourth thing, establish a citywide neighborhood-based summer youth job apprenticeship program. Again, that's huge as well. So I was recently asked to chair the Equity Council for WesBanco Bank for our entire footprint to help establish a platform, again, that we would be able to look internally on focusing on development of minorities within the bank, recruitment of minorities within a bank, community outreach of minorities from out into the community. And that's what we're doing now. But again, unless you're intentional about that and shining that light, things just don't happen by accident. So with that, I will stop and ask if there are any questions, because I know I'm running up on 10:30 quick here. Any specific questions that I can answer for anyone around this or other things on your mind?
Thank you, Abdul. If anyone has questions for him, you can either type your question in the chat space, or you can unmute yourselves and ask the question.
Holly, they cannot unmute
Oh,
themselves.
okay.
So that it would be by way of the chat box at this time. And
Okay.
we'll have the breakout sessions for video and voice later on.
Okay. Okay. So again, I want to thank Abdul. What excellent examples that you share with us from your workplace, and being intentional. We know that things don't just automatically happen. Like if I wake up and say I want breakfast, unless I get up and cook it or my husband cooks it, I'm not going to eat breakfast. So you have to attach action to your desires and your works. So we have a question. How can we get other establishments to recognize and recruit like you did in your example? How do you think we could do that intentionally?
Yeah. So I think in part of this commission was actually I had shared that same example within our subgroup. And from that was the thought, well, if we develop a different groups like this where we would be more intentional about training that we could share. Often we learn as humans, oftentimes by what we see happening. Even if a child can't speak, they're watching you, right? And having raised two children, thank goodness I was married to a wonderful, I am married to a wonderful lady that was right there all the time, and I greatly appreciate what she did. But what I noticed when I was very youthful, and she was pregnant with my daughter, she would read to my daughter while she was still in her belly. And so she did the same thing to my son. And so, well, fast forward, I noticed that what was learned from that is that they both were readers. We would be at a soccer game and my daughter's running up and down the field at 9 years old, and my son's sitting on the sideline and he's reading a book at 7, right? My son is on the basketball court or at a track meet running at 13, and my daughter's there and she's reading a book, right? So people learn from actions and what they see. So the more we can, again, have these conversations, talk about best practices, and then be, again, and I truly believe in intentionality. You have to be intentful and going to, again, go to your employer and sit down and say, this is possible, and these are some examples of what we can do to make a difference.
Okay, thank you. So in your talk, you said that you don't want to create a plan that sits on the shelf and gets dusted. So one of the questions is, what do you anticipate to be the pace of action on some of the recommendations from your subcommittee?
Fantastic question, because I was a little apprehensive, if you will, to join the committee and think, are we just going through the motions to create something and have a feel-good moment? Our whole subcommittee, because it was general and not specific to a specific area, in our thought process, we said we want to present a plan of action to the mayor that says, let's put some timelines behind things. Let's make sure that, again, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, annually, that not only are the leaders looking at this, but that they're presenting back out to the community. I'm a firm believer, though, and I don't know if I finished that thought, is that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. That document means nothing if I, as a citizen, am not willing to step up and hold not the community accountable, but myself accountable. I think so many times as humans, we're great at holding everybody else accountable, right? You didn't do this, you didn't do that. But the minute we don't do something, it's like, oh, it's okay, I'll do it tomorrow, or I tried, and it's like we have to reboot our thinking process on how we hold ourselves accountable as well. So I'm a firm believer that it's going to take teachers. It's going to start with parenting. Yes, parenting is huge. So it's going to start there, and then it's going to start with those that engage. I have a slogan that I use all the time: live, love, engage. I want to live a great life. I want to love those that I'm around, but I want to engage the people I need to engage to make a difference for tomorrow, right? So again, that, and I go back to intentionality. So long answer to that is, we've asked that there are some timelines put in that this effort, this assessment is looked at, and there's an annual mayor's report. Put it in that report annually, right? So that it becomes part of what happens on an ongoing basis.
Okay, great. So the questions are just rolling in, but one that's related to the last question is, what are the specific actions your subcommittee is asking the urban county government to implement? Like, who's the boss of this report now that it's out? Who's going to carry through or follow up on it?
Yes, so that's a great question. So in yesterday's meeting that the mayor had, she came out and she released the entire plan. The committee put the plan together to then hand over to the mayor and the council members. The council members on each subcommittee realized that there will probably be some ongoing commitments, if you will, to this space that they'll continue to go on. However, the mayor did state yesterday that the mayor, right, and the council will need to own this, but that she wants an ongoing racial equity commission to stay in place along with, so that they can work in conjunction with us and make sure that this is actually progressing along. So the buck stops with City Hall. However, she mentioned on the call yesterday when she released this report that she is going to ask for members of the commission to stay on, not all, but some to stay on, so that the city would have more of a working relationship with them as well.
Okay, very good, very good. Another question, I know you listed some, but can you give us maybe 2 or 3 specific actions attached to the plan that we hope to see some action on? Well, we hope to see action on all of it, but noticeable action.
So specifically, like one for establishing a citywide and neighborhood-based summer youth job program. So one of the things that we wanted the city to do is get with business leaders to actually establish a summer youth employment by agreeing to hire a certain number of youth every summer, allotting, allocated and offering donations to help fund job training, placement through nonprofits and government agencies. Another thing was that the elected and appointed city officials can establish a citywide program for specifically the job training, so that our research shows that summer employment among teens from wealthy are higher among wealthy teens, wealthy families than those of poor families. White youth are significantly more likely to find summer jobs than youth of color. So specifically to establish a summer program where the city would be intentional about bringing in minorities and talking about soft skills, talking about professional relationships. So many times we don't understand how important those soft skills are, and not just doing a job, but actually why it's important to show up, why it's important to communicate with respect, having professional relationships, and why that's important to growth long term. So those are specific things that we've asked that the city really home in on. There used to be a job training program when I first moved to Lexington back in 2006, and I think it was shut down in 2007 or 8. And so let's bring that back to life and revitalize that. So again, we have specific focus around developing our youth. We need better examples. We need better examples. So again, specifically, that's just in one category, some of the things that we've asked that the city would help get accomplished.
Okay, good. So you have some things you want to get accomplished, and you sat around the table, and probably the people in the conversation were of probably caliber of yourself, yeah, working community member. But there's some people out there who are not really interested in changing the status quo. How are we going to convince them to get on board with this new plan, new report?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a firm believer, and this is the thing that I challenge the NAACP unit on, because I challenged my family first on it and myself, is Let's do what we can do. I want to get up every day trying to get accomplished things that I personally can do. And then I go back to, then I'll engage others that I need to engage to help make progress happen. There are simply some people that will not change. I was watching a documentary because my son turned me on to it about social, I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was basically talking about our computers, our cell phones, and how these are manipulating our minds. We didn't have to, as a 53-year-old adult male today, I did not have to worry about that when I was 13, 8, 15, right? So right now, my thing is, again, continue to do a reboot. I'll pray for myself. I'll pray for others, but I got to keep stepping. And so progress happens when I make a decision to make another step forward, and I'll reach back to say, hey, come on along with me, but I'm not going to wait, right? You cannot wait. I grew up in a family where my parents told me, do for self, and then you help others along the way. So that's what I learned, and that's the foundation that I grew up with. And so that's what I know. You know, beyond that's it, really. I mean, you know, you just cannot wait for others to do things for you.
Okay, great. I like that. Do for self. One person you can contain.
Yes.
One person you can control, and do for others along the way. So as leader of the local NAACP and as a brother in corporate America, can you tell us what are some specific obstacles for minorities finding jobs in Lexington, or period?
Yeah, oftentimes it's what I call fear. Uh, when we don't know people and we see others as different, we're it's easy to hire someone that looks like you, that talks like you, because it's out of habit. It's muscle memory. Our brains are muscles, and we have to train our brain just like we would train our body. If you want to work out and lose weight, you get up and you work out, and you retraining that muscle is muscle memory. The thing is, we as humans, we don't really work on training our minds as well. And so you have to constantly massage your brain to really be thinking about being intentional about how do I bring others into my space, listen to them. And that's why I believe I'm not looking for, you know, mandatory, you have to hire so many people of color. But what I am looking for is that you would open the doors and take away the obstacles that do lie in front of people of color, because they are definitely there. And so again, it's shining a light, connecting with our HR. And that, you know, it's funny, through this process of being asked to actually lead the committee at work, our HR manager, I asked for some data to see how many minorities were within the bank working as employees, and then from a leadership role, how many minorities were in these roles. And he was shocked and surprised at the percentages. And this is a bank that's a phenomenal bank. I've been in the industry for 22 years, one of the most well-run, well-respected leadership, unbelievable. I have not seen this in my 22-year career, to work with people like this. But even with all that great thought process and knowledge, there's no intentionality to say, yes, we do need to help reach back in this community and help minorities grow as well. Because frankly, I did not grow up and having conversations at the dinner table that led me to where I am. I'm the oldest of 6, but only half of us have a college education, a 4-year degree. Others started and then completed it, but we all raised by my same parents, right? And so my point behind that is you have to really at work be intentional and say, we want to make this difference. And without that, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Great answer. So we have one last question and then we'll let you go. And this one is, I'm going to read it for you. Okay, as someone who's been involved in the past in substantial staff training and community development, are there training sensitivity programs here in Lexington that educates or helps groups of people experience or understand racial, ethnic, religious, systematic bias and racism? Are there groups working around these issues?
There are groups. I would say now off the top of my head, I wouldn't dare to go out and name one because I'll mess it up. But what I will give you is that 2 years ago, through the NAACP, we invited in Dr. Roger Cleveland, who's now working for Kentucky State University, to come in and do a racial inequality, unbiased unconscious bias training over at the Lyric Theater. And we did that, and he came in and did a phenomenal job kind of discussing how our biases are there, whether we realize it or not. And personally, for myself, I found that I had biases, right? That I was literally unconscious of. So I would challenge everybody on this call that if you have not taken a class like that, that you may want to seek a class like that. You obviously you can go out and Google, classes like that, where people will come in and teach. And then I can get some resources through our NAACP unit as well, and send that to you, Sister Rashid, if you want, and then you can distribute it out as well. But Dr. Roger Cleveland, and he does that program and does a phenomenal job with it. It was about an hour and a half. We at work, at my job now, we're going to start doing classes like that for all our employees across the footprint, so that we don't have biases at work when we're dealing with our customers, when we're dealing with one another. When I manage people that may not look like me, but they think and talk different, but they mean just as well as the other person does, right? Because there are cultural differences and cultural biases there. So that would be a phenomenal class to take. Thanks for asking that question. That's very important.
Okay. So that was our last question. And I want to thank you again, Abdul, so much for agreeing to speak with us today. And was so happy when I first contacted you. You were like, yeah, I'll do that. And that's always a good thing. And you're welcome back here at any time if you have something else you want to share with us. Okay, so next we're going to, thank you. So next we're going to bring forward Brian Maynard. I want to introduce him. Brian has been employed with the Lexington Police Department for 21 years. And he did say I could call him Brian. So he currently serves as Assistant Chief over the Bureau of Patrol. Prior to being promoted to Assistant Chief, he served as Executive Officer in the Chief's office under former Chief Ronnie Bastion and for the current Chief Lawrence Weathers. Brian graduated from Eastern Kentucky University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Police Administration, a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice through the Executive Leadership Program. So now we'll hear from Brian, and he'll talk about his work on the subcommittee. His committee was Law Enforcement, Justice, and Accountability. Thank you, Brian.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It's a pleasure to speak with Mr. Muhammad, sharing the stage with him and having the opportunity to reach everyone. The biggest part for us as far as Lexington Police and kind of our command staff is having these opportunities to have these conversations And with COVID, we had talked earlier prior to the meeting started with COVID and some of the issues that we've had, and especially the times that we are in, the opportunity to have those conversations is not available as much. So I appreciate everybody taking the opportunity this morning to get on this call, and hopefully it's a good conversation itself. Like Ms. Rashid said, my name is Brian Maynard. I am an assistant chief with Lexington Police. I did have the opportunity this summer to be a part of the Mayor's Commission with Law Enforcement, Justice, and Accountability. And it was really a challenging opportunity. I enjoy looking at other people's perspectives and having the opportunity to share those and discuss those. So it was really good. Enjoyed being a part of that. And I'm going to go over several of the law enforcement recommendations. In our section, we were originally asked to provide 3 top main priorities. And that's a little difficult when we're talking about law enforcement, especially with everything going on nationally and locally. So I'm going to hit some of those. Also going to take an opportunity, hopefully we'll have some time at the end to talk about some of the national issues that are going on and how we're handling those locally. But if we don't, maybe that's something we can hit on the backside. The biggest thing that what I see is when I'm having these conversations with folks in the community about Lexington Police. We feel that we are different. We handle ourselves training wise. We have our own training academy. We have core values that we go by. We hold ourselves accountable. And the biggest part of that is having people ask questions. Hey, how do you do things? Instead of telling us what we need to be doing, I enjoy when people ask, what are you doing to address this? Or how do you go about doing this? And a lot of that is education part of it for the community. We have a Citizens Police Academy, and I'll put a plug in for them early on. If you have not had a chance to be a part of our Citizens Police Academy, strongly encourage you to go to our website through lexingtonky.gov, go down to public safety, and look at not only the data and the information that's provided there, but an opportunity to be a part of our Citizens Police Academy. We are doing some of those online right now, some smaller groups, and hoping to get those back up. That is a strong component of our community partnership. To find out what your police department is doing, how your police department trains, how we handle things. It's a great opportunity. Again, Citizens Police Academy, I can't stress that enough, to find out how we handle things. But we'll jump right into the law enforcement recommendations themselves. The recommendations can be found online through lexingtonky.gov. I think even in the email that was sent out advertising today's conversation, a link is there that you can go and look. Part of that link that's on lexingtonky.gov also will provide a lot of data. If you go to the law enforcement side, there's a Google shared file that I believe that's still available that has a ton of data. I worked quite a bit over the summer, not only on these recommendations, but gathering data, looking at data, and providing that on a wide spectrum of issues. But you also find on our website a lot of that same data, a lot of our policies that's there for review. But one of the big things that we talked about is recommendation number 1 that hits the request is the participation and transparency in LPD's disciplinary process and civilian assistance. What that main request is that we restructure the disciplinary review board for the police department. The request is to include 3 non-law enforcement civilians. So police discipline, when we look at that as a whole for Lexington, is different than what Louisville has. And one of the second recommendation, we'll talk about the Citizen Review Board that Louisville has as part of their disciplinary review process. By law, by legislation, I think it's KRS 67A is for Lexington and 67C is for Louisville. Their makeup, their opportunity for that is, make sure I'm right on that. Is different than how our makeup is as a merged government. So our disciplinary process itself, if an officer violates a policy, whether it's an external or an internal complaint. An internal complaint means it comes from me as a supervisor. I file a formal complaint against an officer. It goes through our public integrity unit's office. They investigate it. They present those findings to the chief of police. The chief of police has a couple of options. They look at what has been done. If the chief of police confirms, yes, that you violate a policy, he can then meet with the officer, go provide an opportunity. Hey, I'm going to recommend, we'll say, a 2-week suspension for the actions that you did pursuant to this policy violation. The officer can then accept that disciplinary recommendation, or the officer can say, nope, I want to take it to council, or I want to take it to the next step. Chief's next step is then to send it to a disciplinary review board. This is traditionally right now, it is composed of 2 assistant chiefs, 4 commanders, an FOP representative, and that's it. So that group of 7. So this recommendation would add, the request is to add 3 non-law enforcement members, so provide an opportunity for civilians to sit in on that process. So once that disciplinary review board gets presented the case, PIU provides the information, the case file, the investigative file for everyone on the board to review it. The officer then gets brought in front of the board, has an opportunity to provide their side, an opportunity to present any type of findings that they would like to the board. The disciplinary review board hears that, meets away from the officer once that presentation is there, decides, 1, if the policy violation was in fact committed, so they sustain, yes, that this did happen, and 2, what that recommendation for discipline is. So once the board agrees what that discipline is, a majority rule, very similar to how council approves things, that offer then gets presented to the officer. The offer then goes to the chief, and the chief can accept the disciplinary review board's recommendation or not. If the chief says, yes, I concur with what the review board says, or the chief can provide, I confirm that this is my offer. The officer then has the opportunity to accept chief's offer or take it to council. For Lexington Police, and I believe it's the same way with fire and corrections for a public safety group, the council is the hearing board for any type of discipline that gets presented. And there's 2 ways that discipline gets presented to the council. So if the officer agrees to chief's recommendation, it is a letter of conformity that is signed, and the officer says, here is, I agree with the findings, I agree that I violated this policy, and I agree with chief's offer. That offer would then go to council for them to approve. And that's a lot of what the discussion has been on, is how much information does the council have at that point. The flip side of that is the officer says, no, I don't agree, and I'm going to take my case to council. That then goes to council for an opportunity for council to review the whole case. Council is then the hearing board. They're the judge and the jury. So there's a officer bill of rights that has a certain part of it that does not allow for public comment against the officer about the case prior to that case being completely heard. The reason is so for the council, when they get it, they're supposed to be the hearing board, the way that we currently have. So this is an opportunity, this first recommendation, to put some civilian oversight or some civilian opportunity to come in and see how our disciplinary process works and provide insight and look at that investigation. So that one is the first one. This does require collective bargaining negotiations with the FOP. Currently, the FOP contract does not allow for this. Legislation is open to it, so we can negotiate this, and we are working on that. So I foresee that this one being one of the key aspects that we will focus on and go forward. Speaking of the Citizens Review Board, recommendation number 2 kind of hits that in a roundabout way. This is a civilian participation at the investigative stage in LPD's disciplinary process. So what the request is to have a panel of civilians be sworn in as law enforcement agency with limited jurisdiction to investigate informal and formal external police disciplinary complaints, known as a sworn civilian commission. To me, and in the report itself, you'll see a minority objection report to this recommendation. Our committee had discussed a Citizens Review Board. Like I stated, law at this point, current legislation does not allow for Lexington to have a Citizens Review Board. We have to comply with it. Is KRS 67A is the current legislation that talks about how Lexington is set up and how that process is. There's also KRS 15520, which is the Police Officer Bill of Rights. It's more or less due process for how discipline is given to police officers. There's also the same thing for firefighters, but this is what that law is referred to as the Police Officer Bill of Rights. And part of our commission were talking about the Citizens Review Board. And I don't know that anybody on our commission had an issue with how would that look? How would a Citizens Review Board look? Issue is legislation has to change for that. Council cannot change it. Only state legislators can change it. The mayor can recommend, hey, we'd like to have this looked at, but that's where that has to be changed. This recommendation, we filed a minority objection report because it's an end around. You're swearing in a civilian group to bypass what the current law says. So you can look more at that, but there is a minority objection to that report. And again, I think if that's what we want, then we go to our legislators and ask them, hey, we would like to have a civilian review board, and then that can be put in. And what a civilian review board does is there's several variations of it throughout the United States, but in just of it, it is civilians that will then investigate the case, have an opportunity to review the case. Then they provide their own recommendation to the chief or to the mayor, and then that can then be heard either in front of council, or in some places they are the hearing committee as well. So there's several different ways and avenues that can go. Some of them have subpoena powers. Some of them have an opportunity to review the case alongside of the Public Integrity Unit, which is our internal affairs agency, that can work through a number of those investigations. They can call their own witnesses. They pretty much mirror what that investigative file is, and then they provide their own recommendation. I will say that the mayor has one of the things in June talked about, and it was just discussed at the public safety workshop, I believe on Tuesday, was a after action review commission, which is going to be, they don't have any investigative authority, but they would look at any discipline that comes in front of the council, any type of critical incidents that we have. They would have the opportunity to look at those investigative files, provide insight, ask questions of the chief, of the command staff, ask opportunities for further clarification on how things were handled, and then offer policy and procedure recommendations. So I think that is an opportunity that is allowed within legislation. I think that is a good opportunity to include, to show what we're doing. Here's how we handle this. If you have questions or concerns, this group would be an opportunity for a community sounding board for the police. So I think that will go forward. And again, that is in the process right now. They will not reinvestigate closed cases. They don't recommend discipline. They're not changing discipline or changing administrative or judicial findings. They're there pretty much just to review how it's happened, provide insight on policies and procedures. So I think that's going to be a good opportunity. The third one that's in the citizen review for the recommendation is transparency. So publicize Lexington police complaints without identifying the parties that are involved in dispositions. And this is something we're already doing. We have a LexingtonKY.gov police-personnel page that you can go and see, and it's updated monthly by our Public Integrity Unit and our Public Information Office. And we have that notice, so you can see what our formal complaints are. Now, there's several recommendations that came from this committee that we have, specifically with this, that we are already working on. We knew in July, in August, that this was coming forward. A lot of these recommendations were what we as a group from the committee recommended. So we've already been working on these. A lot of it is going to be with the webpage information to identify whether the complaint was filed internally or externally, the date it was filed, what the violation was, the disposition date, discipline and corrective action taken, the sector or bureau the officer involved in, and then, like I stated, that will be updated monthly to show that. There are rare occasions per contract that we can extend. Typically, it's 60 days for an investigation for a Public Integrity Unit. Those may be extended for a couple of reasons, but we're planning on noting that, whether that investigation was extended or not, as part of this discussion. That'll be on the webpage. And then the next one was providing assistance for civilians in filing disciplinary complaints against Lexington Police with a citizens liaison or a revamped citizen advocate. We understand that it may be difficult to understand our processes, how we work through those. or challenging to come down to our internal affairs at our police headquarters on Main Street to come and have a conversation with an officer about filing a complaint on an officer. So this recommendation is about having the opportunity to bring someone within government, a citizen, civilian working in government, knowledge of how our process works so you can contact them. We're also going to put together a video for our public integrity unit to put that together of what to expect when you file a complaint, how that process works. So again, we've already been working on that one, but it's a good opportunity to do that. One of the recommendations from the committee that we worked through this was to have a online form that you could file for questions, or, hey, I've got a complaint, or, hey, I've got a compliment on an officer. So we have already done that. That is on there on our website, and it's really taken a good opportunity. We've had several questions or complaints and compliments that have come in on that we've been able to follow up on. And I'll say this, the biggest part when I talk to folks that, hey, I've got a question of how you handle yourself or how the officer handled themselves, call and ask a supervisor. Call and ask to talk to a supervisor, send an email to the police chief at lexingtonpolice.ky.gov, call 258-3600 and ask to speak to a supervisor. Follow up with that. Just don't sit on that issue or that concern that you have. Call us, let us know about it. We're not perfect. We have issues that we have to address, but there's also opportunities to help clarify some things of what we do. So we ask that don't sit on that, send that to us. Category 2 was more about monitoring and accountability. And this is where our body-worn cameras come in. Recommendation number 3 is to have every sworn officer should be required to wear body-worn cameras while performing law enforcement duties, with minimum exceptions such as undercover operations. When we first implemented body-worn cameras, we have our authorized strength is 633 officers. 430 some, I believe is what the number is, at this point today, have body-worn cameras. And that is all of our first responders. For instance, all of my patrol folks, officers and sergeants, have body-worn cameras. Our traffic folks that go on traffic collisions, our sworn traffic folks, they have body-worn cameras. A lot of our community law enforcement, our clear units, they have body-worn cameras. Our narcotics detectives have body-worn cameras. So we recognized when we first got our body-worn camera program and the amount of money that went into it, that we wanted everyone that was going to have an opportunity with that first contact to have a body-worn camera. The ones that do not have body-worn cameras are folks like myself. I sit behind this computer almost every day, or I go to meetings or have conversations. We did not have the funds at that point to outfit everybody. We've got some grants and we've got some other funds that are coming in that we believe that the January 2021 is the opportunity where we will have everybody on our department with a body-worn camera. So we're excited about that. Body-worn cameras help us. They really do. There's a number of officers, when complaints come in, that we're able to look at the body-worn camera and say, don't see the issue. I'll be more than happy to sit down and we'll review the body-worn camera with you. Please let me know where you felt the issue was. And a lot of times that conversation or that opportunity, there's that perception of what they thought happened or what really happened, that we can work through that and see, well, here's why we did this. And again, it's that conversation. But body-worn cameras is the first one, and we're looking at January 2021. We'll have that in place. We talked about some of the off-duty jobs, and this was recently presented at council as well through a public safety committee meeting. But that general order has been updated to also include those that currently are assigned body-worn cameras and work off-duty jobs with a uniform presence have to wear that body-worn camera. So that is a good thing. Once everyone gets assigned a body-worn camera, those that work off-duty jobs have to be able to have that camera with them and be able to utilize that. So that is there. The one issue that came up that I personally had within this section was a body-worn camera use assessment and report. And we filed a minority objection report on this. And in theory, I think it's the concept I understand, and I'll explain where we're able to help work through this, but there's a certain aspect of it that is just Financially, it's impossible for us to do this. And it talks about officers should be required to review a random selection between 10 to 25%, excuse me, depending on reason of their own body worn camera on an ongoing annual basis for purposes of performance review, promotion consideration during probationary periods, or when officer is subject to any discipline, with such being conducted with an outside coach. This is the critical part about this, the outside coach that is versed in implicit bias detection and or with supervisors that have received annual implicit bias training from an outside source or coach with results of review, document, and report. So body worn camera video is crucial for our training, for how we address issues. If we have an officer that is not performing to the standards and expectations that we expect, we'll utilize the body worn camera. We will review that. Supervisors review that. There's an amount of arrest reports that I review body worn cameras every week. Supervisors are expected to review body worn cameras when there's an incident, when there's any type of discipline, something like that. We will review that, as well as with the officer for training purposes. The issue with the 10 to 25% is our patrol officers, and I'll use the patrol officers as the majority for the example here. They work 4 10-hour shifts. So if I'm asking for a patrol officer to review 25% of their video, I'm losing a patrol officer one day out of their 4 that they're working to sit down and review body worn camera. In addition, this recommendation asks for a coach to review video with them to talk about the implicit bias detection or supervisors. We have 67 sergeants that are within the police department. Each squad is 6 to 8 officers. So I would pretty much have to have a coach per each squad to focus on that. Financially, we don't have the funds to hire 67 coaches to go through this. I like the thought. I like the opportunity to do this. We already have supervisors doing it. So what we have asked our training section to do is to look for ways to include implicit bias training for supervisors to focus on how they as supervisors can identify that and relay that to the officers to work through that while they're already doing their body worn camera reviews. So they may already be looking for that discipline. We may already be addressing some of that, but specific training for that. We train for implicit bias training quite a bit already, but this will take it to another level for supervisors to be able to monitor and do some of that. So there is a minority objection report you'll see filed specifically on that one. Body worn camera data collection. So there's been several studies that look at body worn camera failures, ways that the type of equipment failure, reasons for interruption or ending recording, and that has been brought up. I think one of the comments was we had 320, maybe 4 or 5 body worn camera failures last year. And that's a big number. That is something we want to go get down. But when you think about and you look at for 2019, I had over 302,341 body worn camera videos. The percentage for failure is at 0.11%. Now, I want to get those down. We want to have those videos, and whether it was the equipment or the officer hit the button, thought they were trying to turn it on, or they failed to actually hit the button, they jumped out on something quickly, that is an issue, and we're working on doing that. But that's one of those to review, and we put that data to put that on our page as well. One of the other things with body worn cameras was talking about decreasing officer discretion to turn off or not activate their body worn camera on the basis of officer safety and witness reluctance to record. So this is another objection that we filed on behalf of officer safety. And I'm going to use this as an example. So officer safety is, I had an officer that was in the Thorntons at Broadway and Loudon, inside getting a drink, talking to the staff, seeing how everything's going, making sure there's no issues, just typical community policing, getting out of the car, going to see what's going on. He walks outside, he hears a commotion, hears a gunshot. The officer has immediate reaction. Officer's got 2 hands. There's a gunshot, vehicle's right in front of him. He identifies that there's a violent threat in front of him. Going to notify radio where I'm at. I'm going to draw my firearm. That's my 2 hands. My third option is I got to start my body worn camera. That officer has to have the leeway to be able to address that violent threat, let radio know where he's at. Hey, I need some assistance. Start me some more units. And then we'll hit that body worn camera. So that one I objected to for the officer's safety and the witness reluctance. We have some witnesses that will not talk to us if they know that they're going to be on body worn camera. And I understand, and I would love to work through that, but there's information that we have to be able to obtain. That does not happen very often, but again, that's a tool that we need to be able to get. It's more important to get that information to figure it out. And then we can work through that. Again, that's a small percentage. Majority of our failures are, hey, I thought I hit the button, it didn't activate. And then the officers have to document when they don't do that. So we're tracking that. The other aspect of it is this is a prototype that we're working on through patrol, is we do quarterly reviews. I want to know how many times that we've had a citation, and that's whether somebody got on a traffic stop or arrested. There's that citation is issued that we don't have body worn camera. And so I'm asking our supervisors, we pull that quarterly. I want to look and see how that matches up. I want to know who are the officers that were having issues with hitting their button, whether it's a training issue or they're just not turning it on. And I'll be honest with you, we've started that last year, and those body worn camera errors are dropping because the officers know that we're paying attention to it. They know that it needs to be turned on, and then they're having to document that report saying, hey, here's the reason why I didn't turn it on. The equipment had an issue with the cable. I thought I hit the button, but I didn't. So we're tracking that and monitoring that. So that goes with some of that body worn camera accountability. There's also a recommendation to have an automatic activation. So there's some technology, and we're looking into this to see how much the cost is. I would love to be able to, every time an officer draws their weapon, that there's a Bluetooth hooked up between the camera and the holster, that once that firearm is drawn, that it guarantees that that camera's on. So that's an option we're looking at. There's also, and I don't know, I've never heard of this, but there's some mention that specific buzzwords that may be used. For us, it would be show me your hands. That may be one that if the body worn camera that is in its mode, when it hears show me your hands, would automatically turn on. So we're looking to see what that would be. There's also a request to conduct a large-scale study and analysis of data from data collected over the course of not less than 1 year. Similar, there was a Stanford study that did of the Oakland Police Department of their body worn camera to look at traffic stops to determine different treatment of Blacks, Latinos, disabled persons in comparison to whites based on tone, buzzwords, specific language, and words related to anxiety, anger, respect. So that is in there. That would be a relationship with either EKU or UK, maybe a grad student that could review a lot of our body worn camera and give us an overview of what that is. That was discussed. And then the last one that's within the body worn camera, it talks about increasing time frame for the department to maintain non-evidentiary body worn camera recordings for a period of not less than 60 days. So currently our retention rate for body worn cameras is 30 days. Once that 30 days, if there's no criminal charge, citation, no criminal thing with it, and I'll use traffic collisions as an example. So an officer goes, takes a collision report, they stop their body worn camera, that video will be available for 30 days. If after that 30-day time period, to help with our data management, there is a lot of data that goes into those body worn camera videos, and for costs associated with how those are stored in the cloud, they automatically get dropped. So within that 30 days, an individual that's involved in that collision can request that body worn camera, insurance companies can request that body worn camera, and then that can be pulled. This is requesting to extend that from 30 days to 60 days. We're looking at that to see what that costs, how much more per data. I don't think it's going to be overwhelming, but we have to know what that cost is. So that is one that we're already working on, and to see how that might happen. Recommendation number 4 talks about reviews for the FOP and collective bargaining. Some of those, this is not anything that the police department has. This is going to be per the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the mayor's purview to work through. One of those talks about a local study to be conducted by a university or consultant to examine the history of the FOP, implementing requirements, the state legislative action, reference officers' Bill of Rights. And then the big one is recommend that no city agreements be made in the immediate or future collective bargaining contracts that would create restrictions, limitations regarding implementation of disciplinary review boards, so that they don't want to further restrict that while we're working through. And I think that one, we're all well aware that that one will be watched. Recommendation number 5. So this one is reviews of police de-escalation and use of force. So when an officer is involved in a response to resistance, officer is met with some sort of force, and they then return the response to that resistance at a certain level, we document that and we keep those. Now, we do it through a blue team report. And then part of that blue team report is the supervisor interviews the individual that was the force was used on, talks to them, talks to the officer. The officer has to document it through memos, the reports. That gets reviewed by the sergeant. That gets reviewed by the lieutenant. Gets reviewed by the commander. And then it comes up to me as an assistant chief. So there's a long line of review processes for any time that we use force. That documentation, blue team, then goes to public integrity unit, who they house it, and then it goes to a critical incident review committee. That critical incident review committee is made up of various lieutenants throughout the agency, so that they can look and see identify trends, improve officer safety, provide timely information to the department on what we're seeing or use of force that's being used against officers, and so that we can train, whether it's a training issue or we need to put out, hey, be aware of this, or hey, we're seeing that we have officers that are using their taser in an inappropriate way, or that their batons are not being utilized, and this would have been a good opportunity to use your baton to help get that individual's hand from underneath of them and pulled around so we could place them in handcuffs in a safer way than just jerking on the shoulder. So that critical incident review team, what got brought up in the committee was using de-escalation techniques. We already teach de-escalation. We do a lot of de-escalation, a lot of conversation, a lot of, hey, you could have said this, or hey, you could have pulled back here instead of pushing forward. But one of the things that we saw, and it came from Oklahoma City PD, when we were discussing this, is that they actually in their blue team reports, formal documentation noting how de-escalation is utilized. And then that gets reviewed by the critical incident review team. So we're going to put that, matter of fact, that's already in the process. So that's one thing that we agreed upon as soon as we identified it. We already started working on that in July, and it is coming up to get that going. Recommendation number 6, anti-retaliation policy against complaints. It was identified. We had some language in there that talked about not retaliation against folks that file complaints about us. That's a no-brainer. It makes sense. But some of the recommendation was to make that language stronger. So we have done that. We provided that to anti-retaliation language to our planning analysis unit, and is working on it, updating our policy to include that. Officer discipline. So this pertains, and there's some conversation that has been out about a look back period. And this is social media is great. We use it every day for a lot of different things, but this is one of those things that's one of those, do research and ask how it's used instead of just taking someone's word for it. So a lot of the social media discussion was, well, officers get disciplined, it stays in their file for 5 years and then they can't ever use it again, or it just goes away. Currently with our collective bargaining agreement, there's a look back period. So an officer on October 24th, 2015, did something that violated policy. 5 years from that date up to today, chief can use that same discipline. So you got a written reprimand for doing this. 5 years, within that 5-year time period, chief can say, hey, you've already been disciplined once. This is wrong. You know it's wrong. We can use that same discipline within that 5-year time period. If the officer does it again, to increase that discipline or consider that as part of that disciplinary process. That is, for the 5-year look back, is pretty strong compared to other agencies. Written reprimands in some agencies are gone within a year. Ours stay for 5 years. So that look back period is the distinction. Now, just because we're not able to utilize that as part of formal discipline past that 5 years, it still stays in their folder. It does not go away. It just cannot be used in the look back period according to our collective bargaining agreement at this time. Louisville, looking at some of theirs, they have dates that drop off. Theirs is only, I think, a 3-year look back. Written reprimands are gone within a year. So ours, in comparison, is pretty strong for 5 years, but it does not leave their folder. It actually stays in their personnel file for 5 years after they retire. So if an officer leaves here or resigns from here, that file will stay for 5 years, and then they'll go with that for them. Recommendation number 8 is kind of enhancing information on police reports. We're already working on this. This was got brought up reference search records. So if we pull over a vehicle and we either ask for consent to search or there's probable cause to search, that documentation has begun. We've already got that in place. This came out of the recommendation that we should document all encounters where a consensual or probable cause search was conducted in conjunction with field investigations outside the execution of search warrants and or arrest. That's data that I think is critical for us to have, that way we can look at it and make sure that we're not asking to search African Americans more than predominantly. There's no justification for that. So the officer has to put that justification in.
Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Do you mind if I interrupt? We've got lots of questions for you to answer. And what we'll do is refer people to the report. I want to, as I was sitting here listening to you, I was thinking, wow, what a great opportunity to sit down with an assistant chief of police and figure out and hear how things are running and all the recommendations that you guys are making to keep us even safer. But what I want to do right now is to address some of these questions, and then we will head to the breakout rooms. But really appreciate what you have the opportunity to share. So let me, okay. Let me do this. Can I give you 1 minute to just summarize what you think your committee, whatever you want to say, just summarize your committee's actions.
Yeah, so there were 13 main focuses on law enforcement. We got through almost to number 10. And a lot of those, I think you've seen where we agree with them and have already started putting some of those in action. We didn't wait for the final report. That was the benefit of having, I guess, myself on there, that knowledge and have that understanding. Our training academy, like I stated, is here in Lexington. We train for our community, and we listen and pay attention to that. So it was good hearing those perspectives. There's some things that we can act upon. There's some things that we can't by law that are not set up that we can't change. It has to go other routes, whether we agree with them or not. The law is set up, and we are the conduit of that, of how we react. But overall, I think it was pretty good conversations. We enjoyed, like I said, having that, and it didn't stop there. As you can see, we've taken action already. There's some things that will cost some funds. And one of the things further down the list is talking about a paramedicine unit, about having folks take calls for service that deal with mental health issues, that deal with homelessness, that deal with narcotics issues. Our paramedicine unit has been doing that, has been working with that, has had a social worker being a part of that. We've asked to expand that. We asked to expand that last year to add more folks we have a police officer that's on there because a police officer can help with some emergency detentions that the fire department can't. So we recognize some of those, and it's a great opportunity for us to look forward to work on those.
Great. I'm glad you shared that last part, because a couple of the questions were asking about the medical and social worker component. Has that been added, and will it be added? So it looks like you're trying to expand that, which is good. There's a couple of questions about implicit bias training. You mentioned that you guys already do that. Yes. And one of the questions is, how do you evaluate a person that you're potentially hiring? How do you evaluate their racial bias, or do you?
So there's part of the polygraph, there's part of the background process, there's having communications with folks, and that is all being updated to ask those questions as well. So that's a component that was part of the discussion that I don't know that made it into the final report, but that's one of those things that I think nationwide law enforcement is looking at. How do we incorporate that? And again, it's having those conversations, digging into someone's background, looking at their social media. There are folks that when we do their background, we automatically pull from because of posts that they have made. And so that is all considered.
Great. So you talked about citizen involvement in the investigation process. So what do you think the impact of that is going to be as you move forward?
Twofold. One, I think it'll help educate whoever comes on that's selected by the mayor to be educated on what we do and how we hold ourselves accountable. I look forward to it. Come see. We've got nothing to hide. Come see what we do. If we're not meeting a certain standard expectation, hey, raise that flag and let us know. I think they'll see that there is a high standard that we hold here, and there's an opportunity to display that.
Okay. Great. We'll take you up on that. Okay. What percentage of the Lexington police force is minority, and what efforts are you making to recruit more minority members?
Great question. So about right now, 11% is minority.
Okay.
We look and strive to increase that. This most recent class, we've got 24 recruits that are now on their fourth week. They start their, fifth week. They start their 6th week on field training phase next week. 4 of those are African-American, 1 female. That needs to be better. I'll tell you right now, our command staff, we've got to do better. We are working on recruitment. We work on not only going through local connections, through minority colleges, sororities. We go to the sports teams all over Kentucky and outside Kentucky to try to recruit, to build that up. I talked about our command staff. We want supervisors to have minority input, to be involved there. We've got some folks that we continue to pull and try to encourage to take the test, promotional tests. We've got great folks that once we were able to get them here and show what we do, that we can encourage them to continue to be a police officer and to support their community. But it's a challenge right now more than ever. So we need the community's help. If you know anybody that you think would be a good officer, we've got links on our webpage. Send it to us. Let us reach out to them. Let them show how we're different.
Okay, good. You sound different. So I have one question. I'm going to read it verbatim. Does this FOP protect police officers who have been accused or proven to have committed a crime to the point that the officer cannot be fired or tried?
Yeah, I'm going to say no. And I'll say this, the officers that we work with, I'm a supervisor, but I can tell you right now, everybody I talk to, if we have an officer that one has committed a crime or is not holding their weight, other officers don't want them around. They want to hold them as much accountable because it makes me look bad and it makes them look bad. We don't want that. The FOP is there for police officer bill of rights to make sure that the officer has their due process. And within that structure, that's where that plays into that disciplinary process. I've got no problem with having the FOP have their attorney there, have a representative there to make sure that we as administration are doing appropriate through the police officer bill of rights. But the bottom line comes down to it. If you're not being accountable, if you're not holding the line with what our expectations are, then we're going to charge you. And the officers in the FOP support that. There's officers here that we have terminated before. And the FOP member that sits on that disciplinary review board has also agreed to termination. It's been a unanimous decision. So when those come up, that FOP member, people think, well, they're not going to go with that. They've said that person doesn't need to be here either. And I think that's good to shed light on. Now, is every FOP that way? I don't know. I can tell you my experiences with what we have in Lexington.
Okay, good. Do you anticipate your overall review of policing will result in less use of force here in Lexington-Fayette County?
I would love for that to be the case. I'll say this, policing is not pretty. And there's opportunities where we have to address things. And I use this jokingly that, if we wanted everybody to love us, we'd become firemen. And so when that big red truck pulls up, everybody loves them. Not necessarily the case when that white cruiser pulls up with those lights on top. And we understand that. I think there's things that we work through our de-escalation, through our verbal judo or verbal communication, through how we train to use less lethal, our tasers, our OC spray, our batons, through how we use our firearms, through how we hold ourselves, through how our training does, that we try to limit those interactions for that use of force. But there comes a time that we have to go hands-on, that there's folks that have to be removed or folks that have to be detained, whether it's for their safety or the other public. I hope these conversations work through that. I hope these conversations with our training, and this is one of the things for our training academy. There are some training academies that have the warrior mentality and some that have a guardian mentality. Ours is very focused on the guardian mentality, community partnership, neighborhood resource officers, working with the community. That's a big part and a component that I think makes us different.
Okay, good. So here's an interesting question. What about people who do not speak English? English is not their first language, and you encounter such a citizen. How do you handle such problems or such issues?
So we have bilingual officers that we really focus on and try to recruit from. Folks that may come from other communities into ours. At one point, we had a Spanish immersion program where we sent officers to Mexico. We had a cooperation with some Spanish-speaking professors here that would come in and teach our officers, and then we would go to Mexico for 4 or 5 weeks or a couple of months and then come back. We had to drop that program, unfortunately. But what we do have is we have a language line because I think it's 128 languages, I think, through Fayette County Public Schools that speak throughout Fayette County. So it's just not with Spanish. It's a linguistic issue with a number of folks that we may go and have contact with. But we have a language line that we're able to utilize that we pay for. So the officer can have that conversation either through an officer that may be able to speak that language, which we would prefer. But there's also the language line that we have access to 24/7 that we can have. Same thing with our 911 dispatchers. They have access to that as well. So when the initial problem is called in, they can have that conversation on the front end.
Okay, great. So let me, this is not a question, this is a compliment, and I'm sure she's speaking for a lot of people on the call. But thank you for your presentation and for answering our questions with honesty and clarity. I'm glad you're in the position of leadership that you have. I have one last question, the same that I asked of Abdul, is that now that this report is public and you finished your subcommittee work, where does it go from here, and who's in charge of implementing these suggestions that you've made?
Yeah, great question. I'll say part of it comes on me, being a part of the committee. As you can see, I probably can tell I'm a little passionate about our department. I want us to be better and to do better. Part of these recommendations we've already acted upon because they're ones that we could easily grasp and there's no reason to wait for the report to do. But there's other ones that it's going to take some financial commitment. It's going to take the mayor, the council support. Ultimately, it goes to them. But in the ones that were not lower level, so to speak, but ones that we could immediately act upon, I'm not waiting for a report to tell me. Our community, we talked about it and having those conversations, not only in our task force or our commission, but outside folks. People watch the meetings religiously. There were text messages that I was getting all the time, not only from our officers, but from folks in the community that I know, to have those conversations. And so there's part of it. So I'll take that. It's on us, but it's also on the city as a whole to figure out, a lot of the research components. Those are big funds, and we have to decide, and I'll put that on the mayor and the council to decide, would we rather spend funds to research what's going on the body worn camera or looking at calls for service, or would we rather put that money up front into expanding the paramedicine program, getting more social workers out there? To me, that's the side, that's where we jump on first to try to get that. There's opportunities for us to improve upon. That's when I think that when I look at some of these recommendations, that's the first one that we really go after. You're going to say
okay,
that.
Great. And there's just one more question, well, 2 more questions, but I'm going to choose the last one to ask you is, does the department allow for the recruitment of individuals with a minor criminal record?
It depends on what that minor criminal record is.
That sounds like something you could take, a question you could take offline because
yes.
go on for a while.
There are things that we recognize in our youth that we may do that may not technically represent who we are today.
Yeah.
So we can review that, and that's typically a one-on-one thing that our background folks look at. You got to look at the individual, the person, when it occurred, what it was what was going on at that time in that person's life, and you kind of figure out where we're at today. So just because you have a minor charge on your record doesn't not necessarily mean it's going to knock you out. Now, if it happened yesterday, we may have to talk about that a little bit. If it happened 4 or 5 years ago, that's some of the things that we have to look at.
Great. Okay, again, I want to thank you, Brian, it's like sitting down with your assistant police chief on a Saturday morning having a chat, which is what's better than that. But thank you and Abdul for agreeing to speak to us today.